On February 9th, 1450, Agnes Sorel, the royal mistress of the King of France, died at the age of 28. Her 6 years with King Charles VII produced 4 children, the last of which died after a premature death just days before Agnes succumbed to death herself. Death in childbirth was not an unusual fate for a 15th century woman. But Agnes's demise looked suspicious even to her contemporaries. For 3 days before her eventual death, Agnes was struck with severe symptoms of dysentery, a flux, which gave everyone pause. Had Agnes been poisoned to death? The conflict surrounding the reign of King Charles VII afforded no shortage of possible murder plots. The king's son in particular, the future King Louis XI, had been in open rebellion against his father for several years and despised Agnes, even going so far to strike her in the face before his father finally banished him from the court. A 2005 exhumation of Agnes Sorel's 600-year-old remains confirmed astronomically high levels of mercury, proving once and for all she was, in fact, the victim of poisoning. Who was really behind her death, and why was this young woman so great a threat? This is the story of the murder of Agnes Sorel. And we are live. This is The Good Old Days, a podcast at the corner of history and true crime. I'm Maggie Coomer.
And I'm Jasmin Brand.
And we are back. Happy New Year, everyone. And yeah, what happened to me? My brain just stopped working.
That's okay. I mean, at least we're out of 2020.
Shit, we're out of 2020 finally. And we took a little bit of a break over the last week of 2020. And that's partially because there was a large explosion in Nashville, Tennessee on Christmas morning that knocked out my internet. Thankfully, no one was injured. Thankfully, no one was killed. Minimal injuries, thanks to the great work of the Nashville Police Department on that day. And yeah, I don't know. You have anything to add? Help me out here.
I have a lot to add. All I want to add to that is we should listen to women more.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are we talking about today? Agnes? I was about to call you women. Agnes. Oh my God.
Yeah, speaking of women, we are talking about Agnes Sorel, who was the first official French mistress to a king. So I found a meme, of all places. What a 21st century way to find a story. And it was originally posted, as far as I can tell, on Twitter by a woman named Jennifer Wright. And she put in quotation marks, "Women in the past were modest and had more respect for themselves," and then presented Agnes Sorel, so 2 different images of her, and said, here's Agnes Sorel, who had her gowns tailored to expose her favorite boob in the 1440s. And I just thought, this is my kind of woman. So I looked into her a little bit more and discovered that, in fact, she had been murdered as well. So what a perfect story for us to cover.
Yeah, that's definitely at the intersection of history and true crime.
It definitely is.
Let's dig in. I knew very little of this one. Actually, I didn't know anything about this woman. I have an obsession with French history starting about 1700. And so I typically don't look into the time period of the 100 Years' War. Like I haven't spent any time. But this was such an interesting part of history. And I think it deserves a lot more attention, honestly. I mean, it really kind of paved the way for future monarchy, or for the future behavior of monarchs, especially with their mistresses.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's so far removed, and there's a difficulty in finding sources, which of course we ran into with this one, that people just tend to steer away from it. And we found this when we've done episodes that are farther back in the past too. People just don't recognize the names and places and things that we're talking about from this period of history.
You found a really interesting book called The Royal Art of Poison by Eleanor Herman. And she also wrote an article for a website called Crime Reads. And so that's where we got a lot of our information about her, at least initially. And then we found some interesting, what did I read? I feel like this is You're so right. Like this week has felt so long that this feels like last year, which I guess technically it was.
It was last year.
It was last year. So I found a book called Charles VII by an author named M.G.A. Vail. His name is Malcolm Graham Allen Vail. It was written in the 1970s, and it really focused on Charles VII's reign, which I did not realize this guy had so much influence on the future of Europe. He really did. Charles VII managed to, with the help of Joan of Arc, and I guess about 20 years after her demise, but officially expelled the English from the continent back across the Channel, which was a big deal at the time. But he was really influenced by the women in his life, namely Agnes Sorel. So let's get into a little bit of their early life together, and we'll work our way up to her murder. Does that sound good?
It does.
So Agnes Sorel was most likely born in 1422. Her parents were noble enough that she wasn't thrown out onto the street when they died and left her an orphan. Instead, she was sent to live with her aunt, Madame de Maglenes. Maglenes? Aunt Magneles. Aunt Meg.
Yeah, it probably doesn't have the S pronounced.
With her aunt, Madame Magnele, and we'll just call her Aunt Meg from here on out. Aunt Meg arranged for teenage Agnes to become a lady in waiting to Isabel of Lorraine. She was the Queen of Naples at the time, and she just so happened to be married to King Charles VII's brother-in-law, René d'Anjou. It should not be doubted that the proximity to the royal family of France was an added bonus, right? I would say that's probably...
Well, this was a big score for a woman in her position.
Oh, yeah. An orphan from a lesser nobility family being put into the yoke of this royal family, even the extended royal family, which, as we come to find out, it was not for long that Agnes was going to be in this lowly station of lady in waiting here. Around the age of 21, Agnes appeared with the King and Queen of Naples in King Charles VII's court. King Charles reportedly fell instantly smitten with her. Agnes possessed all the marks of a breathtaking mid-15th century beauty. Her hair was thick and golden blonde. Her eyes were a deep blue. Her skin was so milky and pale it bordered on translucent. After the king met her, Agnes nestled into an appointment as lady-in-waiting to Charles's queen, Marie of Anjou. And not long after, he officially declared Agnes the first royal mistress of a king of France.
Can I just say as well, this poor woman who was his wife, because this wasn't like as standard of a practice at this point. I mean, kings, of course, had mistresses, but it was never like an official appointment within the court. And not only is she having to deal with this as the wife of the king who's going to take an official appointment for his mistress, but she's had 14 children.
I'm of the opinion that she was on board with this.
You are?
I am. Because I read that Charles's mother-in-law, Yolande of Anjou, basically orchestrated this. She put Agnes in front of King Charles. Charles apparently was plagued with mental health problems like depression and poor self-esteem. And by this point, King Charles had had 13 children with her daughter. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that was pretty exhausting. But the evidence that I think that she was probably on board with this, aside from her mother orchestrating this affair, is that apparently Queen Marie became the godmother of the 3 love children that Agnes that Agnes popped out for the king. So she was the godmother of these children. I think that's pretty crazy.
That is crazy.
Yeah. So that's why I think that I think she is like, I've had enough.
I'm done.
I've had enough sex with this guy, who, by the way, was not the most attractive man in the entire world, but virile he was.
Are.
He was.
They never are.
This dude was birthing. What is wrong with me? This guy was fertilizing everyone. He had children coming out the wazoo. And I bet his queen was like, you know what? Get 21-year-old Agnes in here to take this. I'm done, even though she still had one more child after he officially declared Agnes his mistress. But I think they were all in on it. And I think that this was orchestrated carefully to take the heat off of Marie. So, and I think that we like to apply, these goggles of like, of course she would be devastated that someone came in and took her man. She'd had enough of that man. 13 babies. Oh, forget about it. I don't know. That's what I think. But
I know I'm also applying the monogamous lens. They might have been into it. It's fine.
Yeah.
But also, would Marie have had much of a choice?
She would have had no choice whatsoever. So this is all speculation.
Yeah. I mean, I can see your point, though. I can see, like, I'm done. I would have been done way before 13 kids. Like, yeah, go and find someone else. Yeah. I'm good.
Think of the havoc that would reap on your body in 1450.
She's honestly lucky she lived.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, she must have been one strong woman. I mean, that's insane. But yeah, I that's what I think. I think that if she wasn't initially on board, I bet she was like, okay, I can be on board with this. This can work. In July of 1444, Agnes gave birth to her first child with the king, a daughter named Marie, which is yet more evidence that they were all kind of in cahoots. I mean, I wouldn't put it past Agnes to do something outrageous, like to insult the queen by naming her love child after her. But the fact that she became a godmother to this child after the fact, to me, says a lot.
Well, also, I think they're in a fight for the legitimacy of the French throne, too. So if Marie does not stand behind this, that calls into question the marriage, which calls into question, Charles's entire ability to rule. He can't keep his wife and mistress in line. How is he going to keep the country in line?
I mean, okay. So you think it was like really important for them to show a unity among the royal households because he made this distinction and put this woman as his royal mistress, and they all had to kind of get with the program.
That's what I'm kind of getting at. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there, obviously. But I have no idea
for speculation's sake, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm just thinking because I don't know how religious Marie was. But thinking from the point of view of like, this is a very Catholic household, they would have been obviously churchgoers and would have been like following the Catholic Bible. Mm-hmm. And that would have been very opposite to what we see happening here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know. I mean, she might have not been a pious, God-fearing person in that sense and didn't really mind all of this, and maybe again, like you were saying, she's had her 13 kids. She is more than happy to let someone else fill that role for a little while. Mm-hmm. But just thinking from the mindset, I mean, everything was about church.
Well, okay, in that same vein though, Charles VII, it would have been, in the eyes of many, he was ordained by God to rule. And I think most of the time, the reason that kings get away with lecherous behavior is because they can do no wrong. So during her tenure as royal mistress, Agnes developed a wild persona and a reputation for wearing dresses cut so low you could stare at her areolas at dinner. That's what I wrote. She did have a favorite boob, according to legend, and had her dresses, as you've already pointed out, hemmed to show that favorite breast. And my favorite portrait that she had painted of herself, and I didn't realize at this point it was not common to have personal portraits made. So she actually it would have been like a priest or a monk, a church artist who painted her as the Virgin Mary with an exposed breast. And we were talking about this earlier, but this guy clearly had absolutely no understanding of the anatomy of a woman because she looks so disfigured.
There's just such a gap in between both of her boobs. And I know all boobs are beautiful. They're all different.
These are alien boobs.
They're like on the side of her body.
Yeah.
Like complete opposite ends of each other.
There's one that looks like a softball.
Well, they're perfectly round.
Yeah, they're perfectly round. One looks like a softball over here, and then the other one's like 2 inches higher in her dress. So I guess he's like, well, maybe if she took it off, it would just fall. I don't know. Like, she had to be sitting there, right? Or did she just say, I need you to paint my face and I want a boob exposed?
They probably had like a body model sit in, and then she just went for her face.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past Agnes Sorel to just pose for that herself.
That's true. I don't know.
about
I don't know
this
what
woman.
the case is. I mean, Google does list her as an art model.
I mean,
so-
I don't think you could get more scandalous than that in the 1440s. You just can't.
No. Well, and I don't know how true this is, but one of the sources I read said the reason that she decided to do the dresses with her boob exposed is because someone commented on how low cut her dresses were at dinner.
She was like, watch this, motherfucker.
Yeah, she's like, okay, well, here's my favorite one, and you can just stare at it.
Yes. Oh, man. I'm telling you, she is the original proponent of the Free the Nipple campaign.
Yeah, I'm
She's
all for
got
it. I'm all for it.
And I do like the brazenness in her actions. I mean, she had no place in this world, in this particular world, and she just went for it.
Well, and I think look at the time period she's growing up in, because we're thinking, oh, this is so forward thinking and all of everything else. Like, how did she ever come up with this in 1450? Well, as she's growing up, we have the Joan of Arc story. So she is very aware of that whole story. And she, we still look at Joan of Arc as this big, like, feminist type figure. And I know that's been a bit controversial in more recent years, but if that's who she's growing up looking at, she can do anything she wants.
Yeah.
And if she's going to die for it anyway, might as well make it good.
So just a quick rundown of the story of Joan of Arc for those of you who don't know. In the 100 Years' War, France was getting spanked by England by about the late 1420s. And Joan of Arc, this nobody, a teenager from a village, claimed to start having visions, that it was her God-given mission to free France from the holds of England, to basically banish all Englishmen from the continent.
Well, and she was given special permission because at the time she joined up with the army, she was 17, and she's only supposed to ride along, but she was given a full set of royal armor after a private conference with Charles and who you were speaking about earlier, Yolanda, his mother-in-law.
Yolanda of Anjou?
Aragon. And she was the Duchess of Anjou.
Ah, I see.
Yes. So she was financed by Yolanda and given permission from Charles.
I'm telling you, Yolanda's a badass bitch, yo. Like,
yeah.
I like Yolanda.
She's giving me like pre-Medici vibes.
Oh, absolutely. Oh my gosh.
In fact, I would not be surprised if it turned out that she was related to the Medicis in some way.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Who was the
Catherine?
Catherine
Yes.
de Medici with the network of spies.
Because she ends up in France, so there's got to be some tie. Anyway.
Yeah. We should cover her.
We should.
She's
I
so
love
interesting.
Her. Did you ever watch Rain?
No.
Wildly inaccurate, but it's so good.
Is it about her?
It's about Mary Queen of Scots.
Oh, okay.
But she's in it, of course, because they're in court at the same time.
Right.
But it's so good. It's
well,
so
and Mary
good.
Queen of Scots was the Dauphine for a while. She
Yeah.
had married the Dauphine. Wait.
She was
The Dauphine is the heir,
Mhm.
and she was the Dauphiness.
Yeah, she was married to him.
Yeah.
And then he died really, really young, and she had to go back to Scotland.
And then a whole mess ensued.
Whole mess. But anyway, it focuses, like, there's a lot about her time in France in Rain, even though because she grew up there, but her marriage wasn't that long. And of course, Rain is like, oh, and he was gorgeous and they loved each other. And then it was tragic when he died. And in reality, they probably never had that kind of relationship. But it's nice. It's like a nice, rosy depiction. Anyway, off on my tangent. But yeah, so she funds essentially Joan to go on this mission with the army. And of course, Joan's just not just gonna like sit there and look pretty like she's supposed to.
No, God has told her that she's the one. But she led them to victory and ended up getting captured by the English. Charles VII didn't have any interest in trading for her because at that point she was becoming a little bit of a pain in the butt. And she was burned at the stake in 1431. But she was a major folklore hero. She was a major hero in France for male troops, for the women. I mean, she really, this was a wild thing to happen in 1430.
Yeah, I mean, Joan of Arc was really the main person I wanted to talk about because I think Agnes probably was influenced a lot by her, and then also by this world that she's growing up in with the 100 Years' War. So the court she's in is shrinking around her at that time. They haven't had a lot of victory. They've moved, and there are a lot of French people that sided, and especially French nobles that sided with the English. So it's a very like us and them situation when she comes into this court. So I think from her perspective, it's like, well, it's wartime. I'm a woman, like, whatever. I'm just going to do what I want and see how it turns out.
Agnes or Joan?
Agnes.
Agnes. Okay.
Yeah. So I think because this is what she's seen. So she's seen Joan of Arc. She's seen
She would have been about 8 years old when Joan of Arc was doing her thing.
So, I mean, think about it. Think about like when you were little, who influenced you? And I think that's probably something that we're seeing happening with Agnes, because Joan of Arc, of course, was this big figure, becomes a martyr. And on her side of the table, Joan of Arc was for her. She's working with Charles and everything like that. That's kind of the impression I got, although it's really hard to tell because we don't have any like concrete things from Agnes to say. But just perception wise and like knowing what she would have been exposed to and what kind of talks are going on within her circles, I think that's going to influence her character.
Sure.
Especially because she is like, well, many people will describe her as being so bold for a woman in the 1400s.
The scholarship about this woman paints her as like this, I mean, larger than like just a complete 180 from normal female behavior. But it's like, I guess if you're going to do it right.
Well, and it just goes to show a point of what is normal female behavior. It was dictated by certain societal standards, but there are plenty of women that did not fit within those realms, just like today. So it's not any different, because what are people going to look back at us in 500 years and say, well, this was typical female behavior, but so-and-so did this and that was really unusual. So I think it's almost a little condescending of us to look at it that way.
Yeah.
But you're right. You know, there is like a standard and most women do follow it, but then you have other women that stand out from this.
I think just like what we were talking about with Artemisia Gentileschi, the standard at the time, the perfect woman was the Virgin Mary. And look at what she did with that. That is cunning. It is. And it was like, okay, here, I am the Virgin Mary, but I'm a little bit looser, you know?
Well, and what's not to say the Virgin Mary wouldn't have gone around with her boob out? Like, honestly,
who knows?
Someone is going to be very mad at me for saying that. But I'm not going to go into the Bible stuff again. There's plenty of women in the Bible that would have been on Agnes's level. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Sure.
Not that we talk about them anymore. Going past that and into her other circumstances, I did want to mention the son that you had talked about, the next king, Louis the 11th. Can't believe we're already at a Louis the 11th in 1440. He is just 1 year younger than Agnes, and this made me think, I don't know why, made me think of that Legally Blonde case.
Oh,
in the first one.
Yeah.
She was my age.
Did she tell you that?
I just like have a picture of Louis the 11th like throwing this tantrum because his father's mistress is the same age as him.
Well, and I mean, he is going to subscribe to the belief that his mother was set aside, that this was a slight against his mother, and he hated his father to begin with, from what I gather.
See, I don't think he cared that much about his mother. I think what he cared about was his position, because as an official mistress had never been a title before. He's worried about those kids. Do those kids have claim to the throne? And if they do, what does that mean for his future?
And by the way, so she had 3, by the time 1450 rolls around, she had 3 daughters, but then she was pregnant with a 4th. And at that point, it was very clear that Charles favored Agnes and her advice above all else. And by the way, Yolanda had been dead. Yolanda died like a year after he introduced Agnes. So at this point, that strong older woman who was kind of like pulling the marionette of Charles VII, Louis XI's grandmother, she's long gone. So this must have been a scary proposition for him, because if Agnes pops out a son, Charles VII is breaking all the rules. There is absolutely nothing from stopping him from saying, no, my heir is this new little boy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like, I think he's worried about who the next heir is, especially coming out of the 100 Years' War. I mean, this is a whole battle over who gets to rule France. So that's his entire mindset, is who gets to rule France. Is it going to be him, or is it going to be some woman who's his age, his kid, basically?
And I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that Louis XI had absolutely zero respect for Agnes and her children. He punched Agnes in the face. They encountered each other in a hallway at the palace. And I forget where the palace was at this point. It was not in Paris.
It was in Bourges. It was in Bourges.
It was in Bourges. Which
is south of the Loire River.
Okay. So they encountered each other in a hallway, and he punched Agnes in the face. And it's my understanding that is what Charles banished him for. Like, that was too much. Which, right? I mean, I get that. Bye. Yeah. Louis was banished by Charles after this and sent to rule in the south of France. And he spent the next 4 years alternating between rebellion against his father and retreat to the Allies, eager to receive the man who would one day rule France. Agnes stayed close to the king during this time and held major sway over Charles. Her fourth and final pregnancy occurred in 1450, and I can imagine the fear was real for Louis at this point. The relationship between Agnes and Charles was growing stronger after 6 years together. She traveled with him frequently. If her next baby was a boy, there was a strong possibility that Charles would bestow his succession upon that infant. In late January of 1450, Agnes rode to Abbaye Juminet, a massive stone seminary already century years old at that point. There was a nice stone house she could stay in with the king. But shortly after she arrived, she took ill with the symptoms of dysentery and went into premature labor with her fourth daughter with the king. After purging for 3 days, Agnes finally died on February 9th, 1450. The king had her interred in the church choir of the Collegiate Church of St. Ours. St. Ours. And that's where she stayed for about 200 years. In 1777.
She was moved out of the church.
Well, they moved her out of the choir. They did not want the mistress of a former king in such a high position of burial, or I guess in such a prestigious place. So they moved her, and then her remains were again disturbed during the French Revolution when all the major tombs were raided. And
this is the point where they were saying that she basically disintegrated.
They had to sweep her into an urn.
Swept her up and buried the rest of herself, I guess, her remains in a wooden coffin. Well,
in 2005, her hair was still intact. There was still some hair. So they were able to get some pretty good DNA, or I guess some pretty good samples to be able to test.
Yeah. So the first one, and they did do a postmortem, I think, a little bit on her in 1777. As far as I could find, they didn't say much other than the condition of her body. So that's why we know about them sweeping her into an urn. And they said that her hair was still there in the 1700s.
Yeah.
During the French Revolution, as you were saying, she was robbed. So any of the jewels and anything that was valuable that was with her, basically she got grave robbed, I guess is the correct term for that.
Yep.
So they didn't have any of that to see, what she was buried with in 2005 when they dug her up again to do the full analysis of her, which is when they discovered that she likely had been poisoned by mercury. So then we have to go back and see, well, why was she poisoned?
It's important to mention as well that Agnes had roundworms at the time, which was super common, and she might have been ingesting mercury as a treatment for that. But what I read said that the amount of mercury in her system was 500 times the amount that would have been administered by a doctor or a physician, if you can call him that, a medical person. Not really. The king's physician, I'm sure, at the time would have given her a very small dose. That's way higher than she would have been ingesting for typical roundworm treatment at the time.
Yeah, and they said, the report I read said that she probably had been taking that treatment for a long time, because in the hair you can see it, and then all of a sudden there was a big dose. So they can see where that dose was way upped. And it could have been a mistake, but more likely it was a targeted attack. So apparently, Louis XI is noted as saying sometime before this poisoning that, quote, "The king manages his affairs as badly as possible. I intend to put things in order. When I return, I shall drive away Agnes, and I shall put an end to all his follies, and things will go much better than they are now."
So basically, he blamed Agnes for all of his problems.
Yeah, and he blamed her for their estrangement, for his bad relationship with his father. So
it was probably the son.
It was probably the son. We don't know for sure.
I think it's interesting that poison is usually referred to as a woman's weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have Louis XI employing that. I mean, how do you think that she would have? How do you think they would have done it?
So that's the thing, is we don't know, because it probably wasn't Louis XI showing up to his father's palace to like be like, here, drink this tea.
There's a mole.
It was probably one of her ladies in waiting. Let's be fair.
He probably had a couple of them on his payroll. Mm-hmm. It was probably really easy to bribe a poor servant.
Well, not even, because Agnes was not liked in court.
Yeah.
Like Charles liked her, obviously, but she, shows up, changes the fashion, changes the way that things work, mm-hmm. doesn't listen to anyone, paints herself as the Virgin Mary. So she wasn't exactly liked, and there were a lot of enemies that she made.
Yeah.
Especially because she's whispering in Charles's ear, mm-hmm. and that's going to make a lot of his official advisors very angry because he's taking her advice over anyone else's.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so it wouldn't have been hard, I don't think, to find someone to slip her some mercury. Or even the physician be like, oh, you're treating her for roundworms? Why don't you give her a little bit extra today?
Well, I think that it's interesting that this happened as she was traveling. So she's not going to be in a routine, right? She's going to be out of her routine. She's going to be vulnerable. And probably people who are at the seminary, people who are waiting on her might not necessarily be the normal people as well. Because, I mean, she'd been his mistress for 6 years. Louis had been in open rebellion for 4. If there had been as ample of opportunity, I agree with you. I think she made a lot of enemies, and they were just waiting for the perfect time. She was 7 months pregnant. She had worms. She was being treated with mercury. And, it might have just been that a doctor just did a little more in the vial. And she, without any question, was like, absolutely. It's all very interesting. But she did have a lot of enemies. But ultimately, I think it was Louis XI, or he just got really freaking lucky.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of evidence points towards him. But in reality, it could have been any number of people.
Yeah. Absolutely.
There were so many people that just didn't like her.
Yeah. Well, that is what we have for y'all today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please head to your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. It really helps us out. Jasmin updated our review page on our website, thegoodoldayspod.com, so you can go and leave us a review directly on the website. You also have a button to take you to Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to review us in Apple Podcasts, please do that. It really helps us out. And Jasmin, what about social stuff?
So find us on Twitter at The Good OD Pod, and Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at The Good Old Days Pod. And follow us for any updates or just random stuff we're working on.
Absolutely. Well, thank y'all so much. We hope you enjoy the week. Goodbye.
Bye.